So now that we have our Airtable set up, let's get into integrating it with VoiceFlow. Back in the canvas in VoiceFlow, we're going to add what is called an API step. So just come to the developer button over here and then find an API node and drag it out into the canvas. We can connect it to our last block, which confirms that they are going to receive an email shortly. Think of an API as a tool to get and send information to any services that use APIs. To create records or rows in our Airtable, we're going to use the Airtable API and send it from VoiceFlow to Airtable. So let's head over to the Airtable and find the documentation for their APIs. Once you're in the table, come to the help button and then go down to API documentation. Once you're on this page, head over to the table, one table on the left hand side, and then go to create records. On the right side, here you'll see the code that we use for the API request. VoiceFlow has this broken up into fields, so we can just copy and paste them in VoiceFlow. Back in VoiceFlow, the first thing we want to do is to set this get request to a post request. Get is getting the information and a post is posting, meaning putting information in our table. So you can see the post here in the Airtable documentation. And what you want to do is copy this URL that is after the post, bring it back into VoiceFlow and then paste it in the field after post. Then we have our headers. And you can see that we have these two H lines of codes. This signifies a header. So we want to copy the text here that says authorization before the colon, head back to lead capture, add a header and paste that as a parameter key. Then we go back to the documentation and see that we need bearer, and that's your secret API token. This is the personal access token that we set up in the last lesson. So what we'll do is just copy the bearer, paste this to the value, press the space button, because back in the documentation, you can see there's a space and then our token. From here, we can go ahead and paste our token. Next, you can see there is one more header. So we want to go back into VoiceFlow, add another header, copy this content type, paste it as a parameter key, and then copy application JSON and paste it as the value. Then we can ignore the parameter fields and go straight into body. We want to set the body type to raw, so we can paste exactly what the Airtable documentation tells us. What we want to do is copy everything between the brackets after data. Right now, being careful not to copy the single quotes because we don't need those. So once this is copied, we can head back into the designer and we can paste it directly within the body. Now, before we start adding elements that we need, I'm just going to go ahead and delete the fields between the last two brackets. Delete the enter space and also delete this comma because we're not going to need that. We only need one record at a time. So what this is going to be doing is inserting the name, the email, and the status into our Airtable. You can see here we have a column for name, a column for email, or a column for status. The first one we want to add is the name, so we can head back and then just hit enter on these fields. This is going to be the JSON format. So before we do the name, you want to make sure that we spell it exactly the same as the column. So if there's a capital N, we're going to use a capital N. If there was a lowercase n, that is what we would use. So in quotes, we're going to write name. After the quotes, we're going to add a colon. And then in another set of quotes, we're going to insert our variable by typing a left curly brace. Looking up our variable that we created and typing in our variable name, then we can add a comma, press enter again. In another set of quotes, we can add our email. You see it's lowercase e, so we're going to write it exactly as how we've written it in the column, email, then add colon. And then in quotes, we're going to write left brace and then look for our email variable, close it off, add a comma, and then add our last field, which is the status. You can see in here, the status is a capital S. So we're going to go ahead and write status and our colon. And because we don't want a variable for status, we can just write false. So we can go ahead and test this out. Let's test with the send request button. This is just going to ask us to fill in these variables. I'll just write Pope and then 123@gmail.com. Once these are filled in, we can hit generate. From here, we will get a 200 status code back, which means it worked. You can see this in the bottom left. It says 200, okay? And this is what our request looks like when we get all the data back. So we can just go ahead and ignore this. Head back into our Airtable so you can see that the first row we have, Pope 123@gmail.com, and the status is set to false. If we wanted to test this in the flow, we could just come back to this block, press the play button. It's going to ask what our name is. I'll write Pope. And then our email, I'll write Pope@gmail.com. And then we finally reach the API block, the conversation is going to end. But if I head back to my Airtable, you can see that we have Pope and then we have Pope at gmail.com with a status of false.